Good evening, everyone. My name is Juan de Lara. I'm the director of the Institute of the Armenian Institute, and it's a pleasure to have you here. We're still expecting a few more people, but I think just for the sake of also all the people that are online and your presence here, let's just start now. I'm extremely pleased to have here with me Maria Gunko. Did I pronounce that correctly? Perfect. Thank you. So I thought today I want to introduce first Maria and then her topic, because then it will be better understood why she's doing what she's doing. Maria holds an master's in science and candidate of Nauk from the Russian postgraduate degree in human geography. In 2022, she moved to Armenia and has worked in the Yerevan State University as a visiting professor. She was also a visiting fellow at the Leibniz Institute of Regional Geography in Leipzig, at the Institute of Geography, Université de Paris, the Panthéon de la Sorbonne. Alongside work since 2021, Maria has been reading towards her doctoral field in migration studies at the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography at University of Oxford. Her thesis is part of the ERC-funded project Emptiness, Living Capitalism and Democracy After Post-Socialism. It focuses on place and placemaking in small Armenian towns. And it happens that when Maria began her ethnographic fieldwork in a small Armenian towns in 2022, people in casual conversations would tell her that there's nothing there in these places. But this nothingness is similar to other local descriptors that she found, such as emptiness, abandonment, ruination, lostness, and she found that were found throughout the post-Soviet region and beyond. They pertain to life in places losing people, jobs, infrastructure, and welfare. Yet that nothing here does not mean actual absence of things. In this presentation then, Maria will lead us through her own personal reading of the place and describe how they were described by the residents and hope to uncover the truth behind these places. So please join me in welcoming Maria tonight.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here tonight. I would like to give a little bit of background because I have a very specific presentation here. In a sense, I'm using a lot of quotes from the Bible. And this is not because my field site is particularly religious, or not because I'm myself particularly religious, but rather because the fact that when you start to learn a new language, and Armenian is a new language for me, I just started learning it in 2022, you look at etymologies of words, right? And through etymologies, especially in case of Armenian, through learning the etymology of the words, you kind of try to grasp what is going on there. And Armenian is well known for, it's like a German in the sense, like you have two words and then you put them together. And so by drawing on the etymologies, you can understand what is going on. And so one of the words that is extremely important in my field site is ban. To those of you who know Armenian, ban is a very interesting word because it is both like a high tier word, but also very common. Initially, ban is the word of God in the Bible. So, I started my encounter with this word through the Bible, through the Armenian Bible. And so I will have a quote on that. And then I got into it little by little, reading the Bible in classical Armenian and found a lot of quotes that actually pertain to the condition that I was looking at. So for me, they are more like a descriptor rather than that they have like a specific resonance to my interlocutors. So just like giving you this little disclaimer. So let's start by, this is my scribbles from my field diary, because we talked about the fact, well, when Juan was introducing me, he said that I'm going to talk about a place. A place is a very interesting concept. So what is a place? Like there's space and there's place. And we kind of tend to think of a place as this bounded piece of space that has specific meanings attached to it. Like space is an empty container. Sorry for using emptiness here. While place is something that resonates with us. Like it has maybe a smell or a color, or like we think about some specific landscapes. So basically in anthropology, if you take phenomenological approach, bear with me a little bit. I'll go into ethnographic details more, but just like a little bit of theory. Place is constitutive to people. People constitute the place, and place constitutes people. And when I was doing my field work, I kind of felt that this place where I'm in, it's not one place, but it's actually three places at the same time. So there is a place that people describe as chka, or nothing there. And this narrative, they pertain to loss and lack. There is no news, there's no things, there's no people. But then at the same time, these same local people would talk to me about how they're keeping this place alive, basically, without using the word place, of course. But then they would talk about how they repair the pipes, redo the houses, make the fences, I don't know, like gardening and various things. So they stay there, they make it keep going. Also through kinship ties, which is very important. My place is very patrilocal in the sense, it's very traditional patrilocal, meaning that man, especially the younger son, he gets married and he brings the wife home. So through this kinship ties, the place is reproduced and is kind of kept habitable. So there's, of course, then there's visits of relatives, and there's sustaining the family house, there's going to the graveyard. So all of these practices, they keep this place going despite the fact that there's no work there, there's no production. There's reproduction, but no production. So these are the two places of the local people. And then there is something that I call the Brave New World. And this is the place of the diasporan capital. And I might be a little bit critical here, but as I will walk you through my presentation, you will see why. And this is a place that is unrolled like a carpet. So it's there are several specific events happening in that town. Tourists come there, funded. So there's several events funded by diasporan capital. Tourists come there, but they do not interact with the people, the local people, and the local people do not interact with them. So for several days, there's this carpet, it unrolls and then rolls back, and this place is gone. And in this sense, it's really fascinating how you can see something completely different for like 2-3 days, and then it evaporates. So today I will talk about the nothingness, a little bit touch on the devastated home, and a little bit more touch about on the Brave New World. But I will not go too much in detail about like. Completely, it's a huge other topic. As I promised, I will start with the ethnographic vignette. For the sake of protecting my interlocutors, I'm not naming the name of the exact name of the place. This is a small town somewhere in Armenia. I will term it Ajitsor. All of the names of my interlocutors are also pseudonyms. So this is an excerpt from my field diary. I'm performing my usual morning fieldwork routine. I'm sitting on a bench at the edge of the Ajizot Central Square, or viewing the events, or rather the lack of thereof. I know that everything is as usual. Everything is the same. In Armenian, I think to myself, recalling the lyrics of the Emptiness song by an Armenian music band, which constantly plays in my head while I'm in the square. The square's fountain, with its peeling blue, gray, and pink paint, lays idle and completely dry. The asphalt bears marks of numerous stairs with patches of green grass sprouting through its cracks. Overlooking the square are the dark windows of vacant apartment buildings, of vacant apartments in the apartment buildings of the Soviet-made Pompey-Stalin era housing made of orangish tufa. There's the do-it-yourself snaky wiring that has sprouted on the surfaces of buildings like outlandish plants. Within the moment, the scenery seems motionless. There are no sounds of people, animals, or the slightest even whisper of wind. A sense of suspended time is hanging in the air, and the stalemate and eventlessness is felt like molten lead. Day by day, drop by drop, it turns into heavy, devastating, and paralyzing load weighing on my shoulders. I'm looking at the sealed doors behind the metal bars of the big shop opposite me. The shop ran out of business and was closed about a month ago. So how do I go about a place where nothing seems to change? At least nothing for the better. At least this is what the local people tell me. And day by day, I tend to share their sentiment. I become more and more entangled in their disappointment of the lived experience of socialism and their depression. Each day is like the previous one, is a quagmire marked mostly by the disappearance of what my supervisor referred to constitutive elements of a place, or another death. After about an hour, the silence and my solitude are disturbed by Asha, a very energetic man in his 60s who drives by the square in his old Soviet sky blue Lada. "What's up, in chka?" he asked me. Asha manually rolls down the window of the car. Without anticipating any answer, he proceeds. "Again at the square? Aren't you bored? There's nothing here, Panchka. Nothing interesting, nothing to wait for. Everyone leaves, and you should too, Akhchikjan." And at first, there was the bun. So to navigate this contradictory reality of the lived experience of post-socialism, people often turn to this language that kind of describes the state of flux, and adheres to the law of unity and struggle of the opposites. In chka is a very great example of this. It means literally what is there, what is not there. And it is not immediately clear when the phrase enters the Armenian language, but those who speak Armenian know that is very well established. It can be to some degree equated to the English phrase "what's up," how it's going, with a subtle nuance that in chka actually points to the presence of absence of something rather than the presence of absence or the process. The usual answer to chka is "banchka." Literally, this thing is not there, or no thing is there. This is something also similar to English, "nothing much," which denotes that everything is fine without major changes, or to those of you who might know Russian, it's nichevo. Nichevo is it's fine. Nothing is going on. So, and I quote, "What's up, Inchkachka? Nothing much, Banchka. Life as usual. Kiang inchpesnish. Any news? Banchka. Sometimes I have an impression that life is nothing. Kianki, watch me bane. Can't even remember what happened yesterday." The above little dialogues, with some insignificant variations, have turned to be a constant part of my daily interactions in Ajitsor. And when you constantly hear Banchka, nothing is there, it is quite usual to think, so what is this nothing? And nothing depends on the context. There's, of course, religious and philosophical interpretations of nothingness, but in my field site, it gained this casual phrase gained a literal meaning of disappearance, the concrete and perpetual presence of absence of things, relations, people, and phenomena. So when I initially arrived in Ajitsor in August 2022, the people who then became my interlocutors and good friends, they were really surprised, like, "What am I doing there?" And I quote, "So does your research relate to history? Are you interested in the monastery that is located near field site?" "No, I'm actually researching contemporary Armenian urbanism, Soviet, post-Soviet history of Ajitsor itself, and how people live there." "But why? What is interesting about it?" "There's nothing here. Watch me hatakarkir, Banchka. I will tell you straightforward, there's barely anything new, no money, no life. Ochchka, ukyangchka." So telling Banchka from the vague "there is nothing," residents of Ajitsor would usually proceed with concrete examples. They would talk and point to the refractory plant and textile factory taken apart and sold piece by piece upon privatization. They would point to the abandoned school buildings stripped of glass and doors. They would point to the vacant apartments with hammered doors and traces of disorder and looting. They would recall water shortages, occasional blackouts, and then stepping over potholes and walking along various unidentified rubble, sighing deeply or angrily shaking their heads, they would persist saying "Banchka." And turning to this vocabulary of loss, negativity, disappearance, as Juan mentioned in my introduction, so people in Ajitsor, they're not alone. In various parts of the former Soviet Union, people use very similar words Like in Latvia, where my supervisor does her research, they say tuksums, which is Latvian word for emptiness, or they can also use the Russian word pustota. In Russian also, similar descriptors are used, and they do not pertain to absolute absence, but rather a relational one. So banchka encompasses a process and an endpoint of disappearance of elements important to the place as viewed by their residents. Utilities, social infrastructure, social security, jobs, people, in a reference to the specific point in the past. This nothing is actually something that is produced by the combination of post-Soviet shock therapy, neoliberalization, privatization, and war in the case of Armenia. So if we go into, here's a beautiful area of photos of my field site. So it's not very well seen, the captions, but on the far left, this is an image of a 1922 aerial survey, and you can see that there's some dots, mostly like rust. And then here, this is 1970 Soviet aerial survey, and you can already the town. And this is a drone survey done by a good friend of mine in 2023. So here is the town, and it kind of mirrors this. In case of this particular town, it does mirror this Soviet narrative, modernity narrative, where a town emerged out of nothing. It was a green field, and the Soviet state colonized this place, I guess. And the narrative, pretty much when we talk about like there's nothing, it's empty. It's like the colonizers, they have this right to overtake this land and create new meanings. So in this sense, when people say nothingness, they juxtaposition it to previous fullness. And this fullness is not necessarily a real condition, because the Soviet state, as we might know, those who know, there was always this talk of plans and future making and progress and so on and so forth. So it was always kind of in the flux. And Slavoj Žižek used a wonderful term, utopian object of impossible fullness, to talk about this condition. So basically, when people say that there's nothing, they point not only to the actual things that disappeared, but also they talk about the perceived socialist stability that is gone, and the imagined future that they had. So this loss encompasses both things people had, but also they did not have. And the nothingness, in a sense, it's kind of like this very modern thing, which is used, the language is used to talk about the beginning of civilization, just like in the Bible. The earth was formless and void, which will be on the next slide. Or maybe not next, at some point it will emerge. But also, like, it precedes civilization and it follows the collapse of the civilization, whatever that means. So another glimpse of my field work and a piece from my diary. So one spring Thursday is important. I was strolling along the dirt road of the second street of the town, passing under the shade of the trees and talking with Alla. Alla is the wife of Asha, whom I mentioned in the very beginning. And Thursdays and Sundays are very, very important days for my field site, because this is the days when the old Soviet Kamaz with a faded sticker US aid comes to town to pick up rubbish. So for those, and it comes in a very ungodly hour. However, our old town gathers because especially during the hot season, it's quite tragic if you cannot throw away the trash. Rubbish, as my British friends would correct me. So after discarding whatever was to be discarded, the women all usually engage in short casual dialogues with one another, but then this rubbish-inspired social gathering wouldn't last very long and people would go back to their houses. And so Alla tells me, you should have seen Ajidzor before, Akhchikjan. We had everything. Life was so full. On the mornings like this, workers would hurry to their shifts and kids would run to school, while in the evenings, couples danced in the main square, shops offered various products, public buses connected Ajidzor to other parts of the country, and mail flew in bringing news. I felt very lucky to live here, but now that is gone. Nothing is here. My kids are home too, and we out of the house to discard rubbish, and then the streets become silent and empty again. And who is to blame? I will probably skip my wonderful encounters with the darkness and cold, and just proceed to some descriptions. And in the wake of its independence, Armenia was perhaps in the most dire condition among other post-Soviet countries, because it was like the whole of the north was basically devastated by this earthquake. And the country highly depended on external energy resources due to the closure of the nuclear power plant, which was because of the earthquake. And it was at a state of war with Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. And starting in 1991, gas supply to Armenia was blocked by Azerbaijan. And we know there are two gas pipelines that go to Armenia, one from the side of Azerbaijan, and the other one goes from the side of Georgia, transporting Russian gas. So basically the one that went through Azerbaijan was of course blocked. And the one that would go through Georgia was constantly subjected to acts of terrorism, sabotage, and even theft. And so the only remaining transport thread, that was the road to the Georgian and from the Georgian port of Poti, physically could not provide Armenia with everything that was necessary, especially energy resources. And this is how the dark and cold years began in Armenia, also known amicably as Mut or Mut Yevtsur Pariner. They began in January 1992 with daily rolling blackouts. By November that same year, it was officially announced that electricity would be supplied only 1 hour per day, and this was not guaranteed. And so the countries whose population kind of prided themselves on living standards, where independence was greeted with overflowing optimism, according to the quote from Ronald Sunny, it hurtled into a dark and modern age. And in 2016, I came to Armenia for the first time. And naturally, I went to the museums. So I went to the History Museum of Armenia, which is located on the main square. And after I went through all the early histories of Armenia, there was the last hall that had pictures from the dark years. And it turned out it was a temporary exhibition. I could never find that further, when I came to Armenia. Later, so the number of exhibits was really limited, and this is understandable because the people were more preoccupied with surviving rather than chronicle. So this picture, they showed Armenia of that time as the country of darkness, cold and shortages. Telephones and radio did not work. Almost all public transport was stopped. Schools and hospitals were closed, and only a few key factories stayed open, leaving an estimate of 2/3 of the population jobless. And deprived of light, heat, and hot running water, Armenians lived by candlelight and cooked food over small flames of metal burning stoves. In large cities such as Yerevan, parks were stripped of trees in a desperate search for firewood. And these motives, they were very recurring in the exhibition. And here, this is Soviet radiator, which became useless with the lack of central heating. So following the energy crisis, Ajizor faced significant disruptions. Two main factories there, they were both closed, ceased operation. They were both privatized, only to be sold piece by piece. They functioned, all the functioning machinery was sold to Iran or United Arab Emirates. Some ended up in Yerevan. Metals were recycled. And despite the fact that these factories, they were bought kind of in a lawful way, it still left this profound, feeling of injustice among the residents of the town, because they did perceive these factories as their common good. And Ajizor of 1990 stood in very stark contrast to what it was in the Soviet times. And yeah, so the stories of infrastructures became really prominent when I talked to my interlocutors, specifically the stories of their malfunctioning. And here's this wonderful wood burning stove, burzhuika, also known in Russian. So without the gas supply, people turned to the wood burning stoves. And luckily, Ajit stands is in the mountains, so there's a lot of forest and people could get food. So it was definitely dark, but it was not as cold as it was in Yerevan. So we can, till these days, we can see the remnants of these dark years on buildings, such as traces of soot around windows and improvised chimneys. And of course, there's a profound imprint of those years in the stories that were told to me. And I quote, in winter, the six of us huddled in the kitchen. The wood-burning stove was there. The kitchen became our bedroom, our dining room, our living room, and our study. The kitchen table became universal. Under the light of candles, we read, wrote, and did all the housework. There was no electricity, no proper heating either. All the chores associated with a child turned into back-breaking work. Imagine swaddling a baby in the winter cold, drying children's clothing. These were terrible years. And in the sense, so we have these two very powerful words. We have the darkness and we have the emptiness. And in the Genesis, they here again, Bible is very handy. They actually go together, as the earth was without a form and was void, and there was darkness upon the surface. So as one of my interlocutors put it, and I'm sorry, this is words, not mine. Independence is a great feeling. It's great to live in an independent state. But when the darkness cleared, we saw that we were, here goes the F word. Well, the conversation was in Russian, so she basically said that we are in the F. So one day I joined one of my neighbors for jam boiling session. And she told me, Akhtarjan, when there is no struggle, there is no freedom and there is no nation. And this is very true. But what is good of freedom if the future of your children is lost in our country? Please think of the consequences. We were completely unprepared. At that time, Armenia had no friends, no heat, no light, no food. We would sit in the dark and talk about politics, but it was different. We would talk about the war and devastation and war that seemed to have no end until nothing was there anymore. So following the ceasefire agreement with Azerbaijan that is constantly violated, as we all know, and the relaunch of the Metsamor nuclear power plant, light was returned. However, these years, they did not go unnoticed. And hectic reforms, along with the lack of funding, the enduring legacy of the dark years, contributed to the decay of almost all Soviet modernity project, in a sense, like materialities. And some scholars talk about Armenia in using the word demodernization of the daily life, meaning the many aspects of modernity were undone. And this profoundly altered the lives that this thing sustained. And so 30 years on, there are recurrent blackouts in Ajit Zor, and news reports from Armenia-Azerbaijan border remind of the dark years, as well as how fragile the current status quo is. And there is a constant fear of war with Azerbaijan that might destroy the life of this town further. And it is very much present in every conversation. So the interesting thing is, as I said, darkness and emptiness are very powerful descriptors, and they appear very often, but there's a difference between them in the sense that darkness was a spectacular event, like no light, right? No light, no heat, and it ended at some point, producing enormous effects on the lives in the lives of the people. While emptiness is this banchka, it's something that is very slow. It crawls into their lives 30 years after the dark years, when another person leaves the town, another building is abandoned, another shop is closed. So it's a very slow condition, and we can talk about two different types of violences here. I'm not going to go into much detail into this theoretical thing, but there's the fast violence of war and destruction, and then there's the slow violence of neglect. That may be exercised by some states towards its residents, meaning depriving them of the access to healthcare, to education, and to proper infrastructural amenities. And so when when we go into the discussion of what is going on, who's to blame, there was this question, right? Who's to blame? Once I was strolling around town with my interlocutor Hike, and we entered the now idle heating knot, and I was asked, so what happened here? Why does it look like this? Sorry, why is it that it's completely emptied of everything? The roof is gone, there's no equipment, the pipes are cut off, radiators are missing, yeah, everything is covered in rubble. And so he told me they destroyed it, quote. Of course, Nature asked, who is this they? And then he went on saying the power elites, Ishanutun, Ter-Petrosyan, Levon Ter-Petrosyan, Kochelian, Robert Petrosyan, and their friends, they destroyed and sold everything piece by piece. And in this sense, this is like a very interesting, this is a very interesting reference, how people try to make understanding of what is going on. This day, by using this day, they bring in these conspiracy theories, trying to grasp why do they live among discarded objects. And this day, it's like this predatory capitalist state alliances that is very far away, very, very hard to reach. It is somewhere there, completely separate from us and they. And in this sense, it kind of mirrors the Soviet narrative when people would refer to the authorities in the Soviet times also as they, because they are separate, they're far away, we could not reach them. But there is another aspect to this day, which is not, this is one of the reasons why I prefer not to name, not the town, not the people. So there is not only an attempt to kind of locate this agency behind destruction, but also it is a means of my interlocutors by how they take responsibility from themselves for what happened. Of course, we understand that it might have been the new state that lacked the resources and maybe willpower to sustain infrastructures. But clearly, it was the ordinary people who disassembled this place. I mean, Robert Kochelian did not go there and steal these radiators and did not create this fence. So this places like the heating knot and like, let's say Yevailen and others, they became this common preying grounds for salvage accumulation of whatever was left. Anything that was valuable was sold off. Anything that was used was used. So when I would ask Hike, so what happened? And he would say, they pilfered the place, rastashvili in Russian. So in the case of refractory plant, it was clearly the owner who became the beneficiary of this value accumulation. In the case of other things, walking through Ajizor, you can see this wonderful fences and radiators. You can see how metal sheets of all kinds are used to cover roofs, constructors' housing extensions, outbuildings. And it's like something from a very, very different context from a post-Cold War Tongo in one of African countries. So wonderful anthropologist Charles Pio wrote in 2010 that the round of privation sprawled in an extraordinary inventive bricolage of cycling and recycling, of dividing the seemingly indivisible and on surviving on nothingness. So in this sense, nothingness, in Heideggerian sense, nothingness is returned into being. And residents of Ajizor, they are kind of in the god out of primordial void of something that they call nothing. They created something by disassembling it, tearing it apart, putting it back somehow together. And this dismantling for them, it's a livelihood strategy where they do not necessarily get any profit, but rather they're trying to make their life go on. And I recently had a wonderful chat with my supervisor, and we were discussing, of course, the war and its impacts on towns like Ajizor. I mean, constant, no peaceful war situation with Azerbaijan. And she said, well, but look at other places in the world, like there might be no war, but the small towns, they still disappear, right? And here is where the capital comes in. And the world of today in the rugged and uneven that we have been in a very long time. And we can see how capitalism, there's new forms of capitalism there, there's reshuffling of our relations, there's the changing nature of the state from a welfare state to like a nation state preoccupied with war, or a neoliberal state, and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of places around the world that are so-called shrinking cities, declining cities, left behind places. This like failed attempts to be urban. So war is not a necessarily condition for these places to become absent from the maps. And I really like this, again, description from Ruben Anderson's book, No Go World, that our world is becoming a place where we have lack of knowledge about. So like in medieval times, there's this map. From medieval times, we have this beast somewhere around that we don't know, like what is going on in these edges of the world. And in this sense, this disaster, terror, disease are like these beasts on the old maps. They limit the spaces of our knowledge. However, in case of Ajit-Zor, it's not about the war. It's like it's located in one of the provinces that actually is not anywhere near Azerbaijan. It is this pure lack of interest from capital, lack of interest from state, lack of interest from conventional tourists. So it becomes one of those like towns, ghost towns that are listed on the internet, which is visited by that tourists, and photographers, they make visuals of these places, which can be loosely referred to as ruin porn. Visuals that are completely devoid of people, that obscure humanity and capacity behind the societal struggles, and further reduce place to debris. So places like Ajit-Zor, they're left by the capital and by the state to remarkably live out, unremarkably, sorry, live out and rely on the futile efforts of the residents to kind of make a life there. Though sometimes the capital does come in, but it might not be a very rosy coming in. And bear with me, I'm almost done. So on one cloudy August day, on the eve of the event, I look out of the window and see a big yellow tourist bus by the bus stop. The bus stop is overgrown with grass and is crumbling. It hasn't seen a bus for a long while until today. Cars are lining up by the main square that slowly but surely fills with people. Crowd consists predominantly of middle and upper middle class folks and creatives. These are mainly people from Yerevan or diasporan Armenians from all around the world. And as it gets dark, the light on the square is switched on, the cafe is open, people queue for drinks, loudly chatting in different languages. Event organizers switch on the music and the dancing begins. Asha once told me that the square was filled with people and couples were dancing there during the Soviet times. Now I see that couples are dancing again. But a new place is unrolling in front of my eyes, like carpet, as I already told you in the introduction. And so there are discussions, readings, performances within the course of the event. There's singing, and all of this is enjoyed by the visitors, who praise the organizers for how efficient and how wonderful this event is, how it regenerates the place and creates a new life. But what about the locals? 3 days before the event, a young woman died of breast cancer, and the town is actually in mourning, and the heartbroken father is trying to negotiate with organizers not at least to play the music on the square, but to no response. Children sell berries that they collected in the mountains for 1,000 dram per a cup, and the local madman is begging for money. These people seem an excess population at this feast of life. And I quote, "This man, the organizer, who bought everything, he has no respect for us. I tell you, he's a Turk. He just wants us gone, burned by the matches in his match museum. Before it was a museum of local history, but he threw away the collection, he eradicated our history." So this regeneration, renewal, redevelopment, rebuilding, and other rosy words, they actually turn into a new layer of destruction for the locals, whereby a place is separated from its residents. So in this sense, the place has a future and the people have a future, but it's not a future that they have together. Thank you so much for bearing with me. And I'm done. And I will be happy to listen to your comments, questions, criticism, and whatever. It will be really helpful. Also, I want to note two important things. There's two important people to me here in this room who made my journey through Armenian doing my fieldwork there possible. There's Rick, who was my first point of contact. Rick Adrians, who is a professor of media anthropology, not assistant, associate. When I thought that I'm going to go and do my fieldwork in Armenia, Rick was very supportive. He said, don't worry, you'll make it, you'll survive. And he gave me a beautiful reading list of things that I should know about this country. And then hopefully online, there is my Armenian teacher, Gagik Stepan Sarkisyan, whose long and kind support of my futile attempts to learn Armenian from this beautiful language from a struggle into actually an enjoyment. I'm grateful.